Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending which part of the world you're joining us from. I am delighted on behalf of OutPerform LGBT Global Invest to welcome you to our panel on LGBTQ plus impact investing. My name is Fabrice Soudard. I am the Managing Director of Global Equality Initiatives at Out Leadership. Previously, I was with the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights in New York, where I worked specifically on LGBT issues for 4 years. And then before that, I had a distinguished 14 years career at the World Bank. So I actually work with Kelly, one of our panelists. Today, I am delighted to have 4 of the best experts on LGBTQ plus impact investing and impact investing on our panel. So first of all, I'm going to introduce the woman we have on the panel, because our panel is not very gender diversified, but Kelly is saving the day. So Kelly Widelska is a global economic inclusion advisor in the International Finance Corporation, IFC, which is the investment bank of the World Bank Group. Kelly, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Fabrice.
I also have Tobias. So Tobias is the founder of OutPerform LGBT Global Invest, an LGBTQ plus impact investing fund. But he also has been a leader in the community for the past 20 years, and he was very involved with the European LGBTQ plus Chamber of Commerce. So thank you so much for joining us, Tobias.
Thank you so much for that, Fabrice.
And then we have Bill Moran. Bill Moran is a famous wealth advisor. He has been with Merrill Lynch for since 1986, and he's a vice president with the bank. So thank you so much for joining us, Bill.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And then we have Sasha Beslik. Sasha Beslik is a Swedish and international financial expert, and he's particularly known for having promoted financial sustainability across the world. And he has been employed by SAFRA since 2019. So thank you so much for joining us from
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you.
So let's jump into it, because I have promised our panelists that I was going to be extremely rigorous with our 1 hour. So you know, I will start with my first question to you, Tobias. So we have many neophytes in the audience. In fact, when you ask LGBTQ plus people about impact investing, many of them do not really know what you mean. So can you tell us in a few sentences, what is impact investing and why is it a trendy topic?
Well, Fabrice, I hope it's not a trend. I'm not a very trendy person myself, so I just hope it's not too trendy. But rather more a long-term strategy. So, well, as I see it, it's simply a way to allow capital to work as a means of change. How investment can be allocated in a way that inspires the cause that you work for, and possibly away from the causes you don't want to support or believe in. And in our case, that OutPerform LGBT Invest, we have the mission of having more companies to be interested in LGBT inclusion across the world. And as we've shown in our stock tracking backtrack or performance tracking, the higher the inclusion score, the better the stock performance over time. So in a way, that would be a double incentive, in the sense that we create more LGBT inclusion as well as a higher return on investments. And that's our goal.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Tobias. And I didn't mean to be flippant in saying it was a trendy topic. Indeed, I think a lot of investors do find agency to push for a better world through their financial decisions. So Kelly, the International Finance Corporation has been a leader on corporate social responsibility. It has a huge footprint, given that it is investing in most of the countries in the world. So, you know, could you tell us, how do you see impact investing fitting in this corporate social responsibility agenda? And also, do you feel that there is missing links between the funds and the capital and development goals?
Absolutely, Fabrice. And the key is in the title, CSR, corporate social responsibility. Impact investing is part of that responsibility. And you have a number of factors that we're seeing that make this a real issue right now, which is driving the change that we're seeing. So you have the impact of the diversity, equity, and inclusion activities in the private sector over the last 20 years. Who's on the leadership teams, who's in the boardrooms, who's on the investment committees. You have the millennials plus the younger ones, who are the most inclusive generation yet and more willing to embrace fluidity and complexity. And we're also in the middle of this biggest wealth, generational wealth transfer. And you have, as we're seeing, this rise of this conscious investor, as Tobias was talking about, and consumers actually feeling empowered to put their money where their mouth is and to really drive the change. In terms of missing links, that's a fantastic question and one that I'm super passionate about. Obviously, I work in development finance, so impact investing for us is impact investing specifically to support the development outcomes for LGBT folks. And it's a very nascent work. I'm sure you're all aware of the Global Philanthropy Project, an organization that measures the volume of investment by foundations and governments on LGBTQ issues. 2018 figures, 560 million. That's on the increase, obviously, especially with COVID. But if you look at donor governments, out of every 100 development dollars, that's less than 4 cents that goes towards LGBT. A bit better for foundations. Of every 100 development dollars, that's less than 31 cents that goes towards LGBT. Simply put, LGBT issues are underfunded, and we're looking at the most marginalized and vulnerable communities, as you well know with your work at the bank. This has me asking questions, Fabrice, around the structures that allow capital to flow where it's needed most, and what the market can actually do, and how do we create the pathroom? So the huge volumes that we see, with our social bond investments, and the numbers around, I think it's sustainability bonds, which include green and social, is like 231 billion in the first quarter, according to Moody's. How do we translate those large capital, investment and flows all the way down so it better supports LGBT folks on the ground? And I think some of those structures are missing, and I think that's where we need to focus around moving forward and identifying those and trying to see if we can plug the gaps. Back to you.
I love your comments, Kelly, in particular because you highlight that the LGBTQ equality movement is extremely underfunded, and that indeed it does take money to create social change. And we have seen that in the United States, where, as an example, if you look at the impact that the Human Rights Campaign had, among many other organizations in the United States, well, it took money. And so sometimes it's a bit easy to forget that behind change in societal attitude, there is investment. So I really love your point. So Bill, in 2003, in a very visionary move, you co-founded Merrill's National LGBT Financial Services team. Seeing that there was potential in this kind of untapped community, and 2003 was early to figure that out. Even though now a lot of your competitors have understood that financial potential. And at that time, the goal was, what you did a lot with your clients is that you would solve the issue that inequality were creating in their life. As an example, in their family. Today, there has been very positive changes, including marriage equality, that has probably changed the way you are approaching those issues. Do you believe that the money of your client can affect the fight against LGBT discrimination and the fight for global LGBT equality? And do you feel that your clients, because you've been working with a lot of LGBTQ plus family, you have a huge Rolodex of LGBTQ plus families, do you feel that your clients feel involved and that they are interested in having a social impact on the community?
So great questions. Thank you for dating me though and implying that I know what a Rolodex is, because I'm sure some of our other participants may not.
Rolodex is an incredibly useful tool. Everybody should have a Rolodex.
Yeah, there is a huge opportunity, and we often are having clients ask us, how do we make our dollars have a stronger impact in what is important to us going forward? And I think it's something, like you said, initially we were fighting, to how could we best equalize the playing field for ourselves. And we've won many battles, but there's still more that need to be won. But now it's how do we have a greater impact? And we know through different studies that the LGBT community is more passionate about making sure that they are investing in causes that are very dear to them. And a lot of that is, the inequality that's going on to try to equalize the playing field. So there is a lot of impact that can be had. Dollars do make a difference, and when folks are willing to commit those dollars towards different organizations that are more supportive of the things that they want their communities to look like, their worlds to look like, we're going to get greater impact, and that can also lead to, I think, a lot of corporate leadership and recognizing what's important too. How do we want to be, from a corporate governance perspective, how do we want to be a part of our community? How do we want to make sure that we're serving our entire community? And what change do they need to be making to make sure that that's going to happen?
Well, I really appreciate your point. I have to say, I work with a lot of successful LGBTQ plus professionals, and the theme you described, that idea of giving back to the community, is always very strong, whether it is through mentorship or through trying to use, their position to pave the way for the next generation. I feel that all the time, that in our community there is a desire to give back, and that probably comes from the fact that we might, in a way, be the first generation that was given economic opportunities and that was given dignity, and so we are still remembering that you need to work for your community. So Sasha, your work has been revolutionary particularly on green finance. And so my question to you is, do you believe that what you have observed in environmental sustainability, impact investing, that some of those lessons could be applied to what is kind of an emerging topic in impact investing, which is LGBTQ plus impact investing?
Thank you. It's a very interesting question. And I think if you go back in 10, 15 years ago, I mean, the environmental disclosure has created a lot of better understanding of how companies are managing the certain environmental and climate risks, which has stipulated a lot of investments into the businesses around the world that have a positive environmental sort of a contribution, either through products and services or through the way that they manage their sort of a business operation. So if you look at it in the context of disclosure and the available information for investment industry, yes, I think there are lessons learned. And, that's one of the things that just before this seminar, this conference, I've done a bit of a research and looked at the way what is available out there in terms of the information. And I have to say that I'm stunned that it's so limited and, under the all kinds of standards that you will like to see when it comes to information availability, especially on the corporate side. Of course, there are differences between the US and Europe. In some European countries, like Nordic countries, it's forbidden by law to, particularly on the race side. I mean, that being one social angle of the human sort of a rights spectrum. But I think what is interesting is that you have investment community that is talking a lot about impact from a climate perspective. But of course, in the sort of a follow-up of the climate, you will have a lot of the social issues coming up, inequality being one of them, and LGBT questions being also part of that. So yes, disclosure needs to improve. We need to have much better information, and corporates need to report much more on how they are actually trying to manage some of these issues in their operations. And that's not the case today. And that's very unfortunate, because the lack of information is also creating a lack of interest and difficult to evaluate this in your investments, which also make it hard to get people to focus around it.
Yeah, I completely agree, Sasha. And that's interesting because, during Pride, I do a lot of events in which I meet LGBTQ plus employees. And very often what comes out is that people have difficulties figuring out who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. You know, not that the world is split between good guys and bad guys, but by that I mean that sometimes it's difficult to know what companies are really doing within the wall of the company and outside of the wall of the company to support that LGBTQ plus agenda. And meaning, you know, looking behind the rainbow flag at concrete actions that they are taking, whether it's with their employees or with the overall community.
Yeah, it's a part of, yeah, you're right. It's a part of the internal culture of the company, but it's also something that is linked to their products and services. And in many ways, how do they conduct their business operations and where do you do that? And in what sense are these things contributing to increase inequality, you know, for LGBT persons and other people around the world? So it is a lack of information and statistics in many ways that is creating a lot of I would say empty space that nobody's actually trying to tackle.
Thanks, Sasha. And actually, that's a great gateway to my conversation, to my next question to you, Tobias, which is, you know, you have created a fund, OutPerform LGBT Global Invest. And, you know, how are you going to select the companies in which the fund will invest? And, you know, what are going to be your criteria to decide what is having a positive impact on the community, what doesn't? You know, what do you think is the expertise that is needed to be a good impact investing LGBTQ plus fund?
Yes, that is, I mean, it's always a tricky part. And I think that there have been some good initiatives in the past in looking into these things and trying to measure this, for example, from Human Rights Campaign in the US and other parts. But I also think that we need to take a new look at this. What does it actually mean, and how can we assess the results of such service in a proper way to make sure that they actually are not just a paper product, but is something that goes through the business as it is. And in a way, our idea and vision from OutPerform is that we want more LGBT companies to be LGBT inclusive. That's the main purpose. We want them to understand not only some US companies that are very good, some UK companies, for example, and others, but we want this to be something around the world to be more understood and communicated. So going back to the basic thing about, you know, the importance of sales and the importance of talent acquisitions and innovation, all the things that you can calculate into a business strategy from a private sector angle. And we of course also believe that private enterprises have a potential to change things, not only for their employees in various parts of the world, but also to engage those employees and engage corporations to be more active in countries where perhaps NGOs have problems of being as active as we would have liked them to be. So that's the private sector catalyst of change idea that I really strongly push for, and that we really believe can be a part of that change. And of course, then we need to prove for them that it is something that is good, and it's a good thing to do, not just because it's good, but also because it's good for the actual business.
Yeah. Well, as you know, Tobias, when I was at the United Nations, I had the privilege to co-write United Nations corporate standards on LGBTQ plus issues, and the fifth standard, acting in the public sphere, was this idea that companies today have an incredible opportunity to advance social change in places where LGBTQ people are embattled, which frankly is the majority of the world. And I'll tell you, in the past few years, I have observed, as an example, when India decriminalized, how when the private sector takes a stance on LGBTQ plus issues, sometimes it is perceived as more neutral, and therefore it is more effective in contributing to a change. And you know, the decision from the India Supreme Court is incredibly long, famously long, but in it, there is a lot of reference to the private sector, and how the private sector basically sent a signal to the court that it was time for change. And so I really believe in what you say, which is that companies can have an impact on that human rights situation, on one of the biggest human rights challenges of our time. So Kelly, in the first question, you described that gap between capital and development goals. something the World Bank has been working on for a very long time, which is to try to bridge that gap. So that would lead me to my next question, which is, what do you believe can be done to better connect capital to impact investing funds options?
Thanks, Fabrice. I totally agree with Sasha. I was like, he's stolen my answer. It's all about information. And I'm an information professional by training. Information is critical here. We need an increase in the awareness and understanding of LGBT, but it does require a nuanced approach, which is something at a level of complexity which is often challenging for the financial sector. Again, we need to understand more about the current knowledge of the lived LGBTQ experience, because what we have currently is limited, both in the government and private sector, well, the public sector sphere. We're learning more from the private sector sphere, but it's still not good enough. There are obviously massive differences in legal and cultural frameworks globally. There's differences in language. There's differences between an L, a G, a B, a T, a Q, a plus. All of those need to be considered, and that's going to require a multidisciplinary approach to really taking a deep dive into the complexity of this, especially when we get to the really tricky challenges, which include measurement. And we alluded to this. It's impossible to count LGBT people, especially in countries where it's criminalized. It's at 68 countries to date, and yet facing discrimination in many, many more. Information is the first piece. The second is around this deep dive into complexity. And the third is for us to start thinking about the gender lens construct and what has actually been useful in that. Just like we're looking at the green lens and the sustainability lens, what has gender lens done? How can it help us think about the models which would be useful to start identifying opportunities? Although there are different challenges, obviously, the current gender lens is quite a binary gender approach. So we need to think a bit about that, but there are opportunities in entrepreneurship, ecosystem development, which I alluded to before, which are underfunded and need to happen. Opportunities in employment and workplace equity, which the panel have alluded to, which we see activity on, and then also products and services. I think it's 3.9 trillion is the figure for the LGBT GDP globally. I think that was LGBT Great or something like that produces that. That's a lot of cash. And finally, I think I'm super heartened, even though this is nascent, I'm heartened by the market measures to date. So we have the International Capital Markets Association social bond principles, and IFC is executive chair of, or on the executive committee and chair of that sustainable bonds and sustainability linked bonds. And for the first time in 2018, we had use of proceeds actually specifically identify sexual and gender minorities. That was a big win, right? Because it's now in the fabric and the framework of some of our biggest investing tools. I think that will have a big difference. We have a lot of guidelines that the market is producing because it knows it needs to measure. It's responding in the way that it knows how to respond. So we have the IFC operating principles for impact measurement, guidelines for impact investors and also asset managers. We have this kind of move towards global consensus with the IMP, with how to measure and manage and report impact, which I'm hugely pleased by. We've got the ongoing work on capital market development, led by a lot of the development finance institutions in emerging markets. That's only going to be helpful and useful. And obviously also we have the rise of specific funds. So LGBT Greats, Backstage Capital, 2 examples in the US. So those 4 pieces, I think, are where we need to start. And for me as an information professional, it all starts with information and not to be scared of complexity. We can do hard things.
Yeah, how very World Bank of you to make the case for information and transparency. I have to say that when I met you, you had the best title in the World Bank because I think you were the knowledge officer of the International Finance Corporation, which sounds a little bit like the Yoda of the World Bank Group.
So that was the global head of knowledge and learning for the International Finance Corporation. Best title ever. I know. I don't think it's going to be beaten. As to Yoda, probably not.
You cannot beat that. You cannot beat head of global knowledge. So switching to you, Bea, do you feel that your clients, and I'm saying your clients, but let's not focus only on your Rodoleg. Do you feel that people in the community are kind of aware of their options when it comes to impact investing? Actually, Kelly just named 2 LGBTQ plus impact investing funds that are existing. And what do you think could be ways to make the community more aware of what their options are?
I think that some people have an awareness, but there's a lot of opportunity. I think that there's a great desire, but sometimes people just don't know where to go to get that information as to what they want to be doing. So, whether they're dealing with other professionals or, they're doing a Google search or whatever it is. And I think that, we as a community, to Kelly's point, I mean, information is everything. And just because it's complex doesn't mean that we shouldn't be having the conversations. We should continue to have these conversations. One of the conversations that I try to make sure that I have with all my clients is, what are your goals? What's important to you? I'm just a caterer. It's your party. Tell me what you want the party to look like, and we're going to make it happen for you. And so I think that, as long as we continue to have these conversations and recognize that, is it going to be perfect all the time? No, it's not going to be perfect all the time, but it will get better and better. And there will be more opportunities that are being made available to people, especially as we ask for it. The consumer is a huge driving force. And if the consumer says that, this is important to me, I want more of this, then it will come to surface. The market will make it come to surface.
Yeah, to me that's interesting, because what I see a lot also is people that understand their power as employees, they understand their power as consumer, but they don't always understand their power as investors. You know what I mean? They see that as that thing that Bill Moran is taking care of, right? They don't really see that they can actually, by creating demand, develop products that are going to have a positive impact on the world they live in. So I love the fact that you put the accent on the demand, which is that LGBT people have to also ask for these products to become more sophisticated, to become more available. Thank you very much for this, Bill. So Sasha, we don't want to steal all of your trade secrets, but you've created an impact investing fund, the Nordea Sustainable Fund, that you launched in 2011, and it is now one of the most recognized names in impact investing. So could you tell us, in your opinion, what was the recipe for your own success and for the success of your fund?
Well, I don't know how long time do you have, but I can at least start.
I mean, look, I think 2 more hours.
Yes, that's not a problem. But I think we'll try to keep it until 7:30 my time. But okay, I think what was said earlier is very interesting, because the better is always better than perfect. So moving things sequentially, forward is really, really good. One of the things that I learned is education. So what I did back in 2011 is to launch a family of products that I called STARS for Nordea Asset Management. And all of these products had a very clear outcome, sort of a feature. An outcome was that all of them had a target to provide clients with certain kind of outcome, or either on, decrease CO2 emissions, or improve working conditions, or issues related to human rights and so on. And I started very early on to measure these things. Nowadays, these outcome-driven investment products are Article 9 in European SFDR regulation, which means that they are very interesting from that point of view. But going back to the thing on education, what I did initially, and this is the part that I agree on the demand, but I also think that education is very important, because people need to understand. Just to give you an analogy that is very interesting, most of the people will, take a bike in the US or in Europe, and they will avoid, fossil fuels and all of these things, and they will buy organic, and they will care about what their kids or what their partners eat and all of these things. But when you ask them, do you know that your pensions are actually invested in a completely different direction? They will be like a question mark, because they don't understand the connection. So when they understand the connection, then they understand that by investing, they get a ticket to the global world, and they can actually voice what they believe is the right thing for them to invest in much more efficient way than voting every 4th year. So what I did is that I created an educational module for Nordea clients. That Nordea has the biggest Nordic bank, has about 10 million clients, 30,000 employees. So I created an educational module, animated educational module for people to understand the connection between the investments and what these investments are contributing to and not contributing to. And that was a sort of a trigger on the demand side. So what I would suggest, it's a very interesting discussion that we have. And what I was thinking in my head is to introduce the LGBTQ plus index, the global index in the world, to say that, okay, this is what we want. This is a target we want to have. And how can we get there? How can we increase education around this? How can we get people more aware of the fact that the investments, being in the US or in China or in Europe, have a actually direct impact on the things on the ground? And that will be a very sort of a hands-on approach.
I love that. I have to say that it also, to me, it connects with what Kelly said earlier about generation. Because I remember when I was in the World Bank group, we had a junior professional officer that came in and said he wanted to know where the pension money was invested. And, you know, it would never have crossed our mind, you know, of people of my generation. We didn't care. They would take the money from our paycheck. They would put it in a pension fund. But that guy said, I want to make sure that the pension fund is investing my money in ways that are aligned with the values of the World Bank. And it was a crazy conversation, you know, and there was resistance from the pension fund to disclose the information at first. And eventually, yeah.
Of course it is. And look, there is a, you know, the pride and all of these things happening around the world. You have this situation, let's say, I mean, if you have it in Sweden or in Switzerland, where I live today, doesn't matter. But you have a number of companies sort of hijacking the flag and doing all of these things. And at the same time, they are managing the money and investing the money in a completely different way. And this is something that people need to be aware. They need to understand there is a connection between, you know, what these companies are selling to you and what they actually in practice are trying to do with your money. And when people when they understand the connection, then the process starts when they start asking questions and when they start putting demands, and then you can educate them, and suddenly you come into the position where you can actually help them to both contribute to increase the equality in this side, but also make money. Because investments are the reason why this thing in Nordea was successful. It's that this is one of the most financially successful product families, and they've made a huge amount of money on that. So it's related to performance as well. This is not just about doing nice things. It's about actually making money as well.
Yeah, and that's something that actually Tobias highlighted at the beginning, which is that he's convinced that companies that are behaving in a way that is according to the values of our community tend to also outperform the market. So Tobias, can you talk a little bit about that? Is there a real case to be made that companies that respect human rights have better return than companies that don't?
Well, at least so it would seem. As far as we have been able to screen, compare, and adjust for various industries, when we backtrack it, that seems to be the case. Yes, and considering that we have quite a lot of companies that we have done this screening on, then it seems to be too much of a coincidence to not to be true. So yes, I would like to believe that, and I will keep believing that until I'm convinced otherwise. Yes, that's what it seems. From all various sorts of aspects, they seem to be somewhat more successful. Also, when it comes to the stock performance in the end.
And there is also a bit of an intuitive aspect, which is, you know, if you do respect human rights of LGBTQ plus people, you tend to attract better talent. Your talent is happier. So, you know, we can see how there is connections between, you know, living your values and having good financial returns. So Tobias, to come back to your fund, which investments are you looking at? What would be the best way to create change through investment allocation, in your opinion?
Well, I've come to the point where one of the times in life where size actually does matter, and as the larger we would get and the more active we would get, the more impact or result you would of course receive. So from our perspective, we certainly would like to have, of course, as much managed capital as we can, more or less, as any other competitor would like to have. We have also been anything from individuals to institutions, basically across the world. We have also been looking somewhat for shareholders in order to be able to really make a global impact rather than regional impacts, because we believe it has to be a global concept, especially since we also have a philanthropic part and component of our vision, which is then to give back to the community by supporting the next generation of LGBT entrepreneurs, then particularly in areas where it can be hard to develop, such as in Africa and East Asia, for example. So and then since we've gathered a tremendous amount of rather tremendous people from around the globe who can give us information and feedback and connection to the regional communities across the world, I think that we can really from top down to top make actually a really good impact, provided we are strong enough or vocal enough at least.
So Kelly, to follow on that question, I have a bit of a surprise question for you. There is a number of index that exist. There is in the United States, we have the Corporate Equality Index of the Human Rights Campaign, which is becoming increasingly global. In the UK, there is a Stonewall Index, which also covers a huge number of companies. And in fact, I see new index all the time. Now, I think I can't remember the name of that foundation. I think it's called the Other Foundation in South Africa, has developed its own index and I think it's the third iteration this year. So, you know, as someone who is very focused on information, do you pay attention to the index? Do you think that they could improve? Do you believe that they are a good measurement of which companies are on the right side of the equation and which companies are not doing enough?
Thanks, Fabrice. And having had first-hand experience of being part of the Stonewall Index and, just FYI, leading Ernst & Young to #1 spots before I joined International Finance Corporation. They do have an importance, and I think they have an importance in a couple of ways. One, I think it's a good start. It gives companies who may or may not be, who may be on different levels of their journey around inclusion, it gives them something to aim for. And then it also introduces competition. And we know that private sector thrives on competition, and progress is, that's a really important lever that we need to be able to pull. You mentioned South Africa. I've seen stuff in Mexico. I've seen stuff in India. I think people are latching on to there is a lever to drive the kind of change, and that there is such a pressure on brand, be that from an employee perspective, a talent management perspective, but also from your pink dollar perspective, super critical. So I do think they do have a place to play in the market. But I was super interested in what Sasha had to say around a broader index. If we're looking at the outcomes of for LGBT people, kind of at a country level, one index is around inclusion in companies. Well, that's great, but what are we really trying to solve? Where are the biggest development challenges for LGBT people, and how can then the private sector be a bit more, I guess, creative in actually and contributing to that? So I'm super interested to see how they've done it within the green and sustainability field, and to see what we can then learn from. And I think it's going to get us to complexity, but as I said, we should not shy away from complexity. Thanks.
Thanks. And actually that brings me to my next question to you, Sasha, which is that it could be tempting to look at impact investment from the point of view of silos, meaning race, the environment, LGBTQ plus issues. And I used to have a joke when I was at the United Nations, which was slightly unpleasant, but I would say that the companies that were the most motivated to position themselves on LGBTQ plus issues tended to be the worst polluters, right? The worst plastic polluters in the world. Or they tended to be, banks because everybody suspected them of having created the 2008 financial crisis. Or they used to be extractive industry because they were destroying the environment, and therefore they wanted to build their reputation by being the pro-LGBT company. How do you believe that we can mitigate that risk of pinkwashing, which is, companies that are actually having a positive impact on LGBTQ plus issues, but are actually having a very negative impact on, as an example, the environment?
I think the pink washing and the greenwashing and whatever you call it will be with us for probably for many years to come. And the very sort of transition process we are in will entail a number of sectors or companies that will try to be free riders of this in one way or another. But given that we are living in far more informed sort of environment today than we did before, I think it's much easier to sort of see through some of these things. I mean, you see what's going on in this big European champion in football, where the football players are taking away brands from the table. I mean, this is something is really happening. So it's quite obvious. This was impossible 2 years ago, 4 years ago, but it's possible now. So individuals are taking actions, and this is something also which is related to, I think, the questions that we are discussing right now. So how do we create a better understanding? Is that going back to what I addressed before? What do you get when you buy a product or service from the company when it comes to the questions that are important for you? LGBTQ questions, climate questions. What do you get? When you buy Tesla, you get a climate car, but do you actually know that in the process of producing Tesla, which is renewable giant in the world, producing electric vehicles, the extraction of cobalt, refinery of cobalt used in China, transports, all of these things will have tremendous impact on human rights issues, including LGBTQ questions. Do you know anything about that? At this stage, you don't, but you should. And I think going back to information, education, and transparency, we need to ask these companies these questions. My experience, I've done this for 20 plus years, that the Swedish corporates are well known for equality issues, gender equality issues. But I tell you, this is my really honest experience after 160 traveling days per year around the world before Corona, visiting companies. The equality gender policies will stop where the Swedish border ends. Indeed. So if they would have a business operations in Poland, or it will have a business operations in Saudi Arabia or in China, it will look completely different. So what I'm trying to say is that it is a process, it's a transition. We need to start asking these questions. We need to hold them accountable, and we need to demand transparency. And that's something that is not the case today, and it needs to change. And it's in the same way as you have the, climate becoming a part of financial accounting today, or there is a huge demand from the investment community. We need to put demand on the investment community to account for this as well, and to push companies to be transparent about this.
Well, that's such a smart point, Sasha, because I think some companies are thriving in the opacity. They don't want people to look too closely, and they know, as you say, that people will have difficulties getting that information, so they can live in that murky world. And when I was at the UN, we had a company that was a huge champion on marriage equality. But as soon as they got under attack from a Muslim cleric in Indonesia, they threw LGBTQ plus people under the bus. They said, oh, no, those are, we don't have any ideological engagement. And well, the consumers back in the United States does not know that.
There is one thing that I think we need to sort of think in investment mind. So, LGBTQ questions are not, for me, they are political, but they're actually human rights questions. They are rights questions. People have rights, and they need to be sort of a human rights. Health and safety is a human right for the workers, but the other preferences are also the human rights. And this is something sort of in the investment community, everything that becomes political, it becomes very difficult and complex. We don't want to deal with politics, we deal with money, we deal with investments, no politics. So because I think one of the reasons why it's hard, it's because the question is politicized a lot. It's not seen from a human rights perspective, and that's a completely different ballgame.
No, that's a very good point. And, when I was at the UN, that idea of working on human rights of LGBTQ plus people was that companies understood that responsibility when it came to human trafficking, or they understood that responsibility when it came to child labor. But on the specific question of LGBTQ plus issue, as you say, they didn't see it from the point of view of human rights. They saw it as, oh, it's being nice to people, or it's a question of culture. I don't really have any obligation. I can adapt to the country I am on. And so I love your point. I think it's really powerful. So Bill, I have one question to you. And again, same thing with Sasha. I don't want to steal all of your trade secrets. But a lot of your success is about creating a reputation and creating trust with the LGBTQ plus families you work with and the LGBTQ individuals you work with. How do you believe that a global impact fund, do you have any recommendation for global LGBTQ plus impact fund to try to create that reputation and that relationship of trust with the LGBTQ plus consumer market?
I think a lot of that's, and it's a great question. And I think that a lot of what Sasha just said makes a lot of sense. You've got to have transparency. People have to be able to see exactly what's going on here. What's making up the sausage. Everybody needs to know what's going on there, and recognize that we're doing things. Yes, we're doing things that will lead to clients getting better returns, but we're doing things that are also leading to a world that will be a better place, where there is equality for everybody. And I think that's the bigger thing, is that we've got to drive, not so much just being focused on the now and what it's just the micro point, but looking at the macro perspective of it as well. And so that people understand, why are we doing all this, and really where is this all being driven from? And we're doing it for the right reasons. We're doing it because we want to, again, and it's kind of going back to what everybody's been saying, Callie's point as well, just because it's complex doesn't mean that you walk away from it. And to get people to understand these very complex nuances, it's going to take a lot of education. It's going to take time, but we just need to keep doing it. You can't stop. You just got to keep doing it.
Well, great. So, I think I have a question in the chat, if you don't mind, because I cannot be so self-centered as to monopolize the entire conversation. So I think this is a question maybe I will direct to you, Tobias, and it's a question from Amar in the chat. And the question is, for someone interested in entering the LGBTQ plus impact investing space, what should they be seeking to learn? What resources should they be utilizing to learn more about LGBTQ plus impact investing? I think we discussed a lot about the fact that there's not a lot of resources out there, but where would you direct anybody that wants to learn more?
Well, you can start talking to us, I guess. But apart from that, I don't think there is any way around taking the time it takes to actually really go into and study things properly. I think it is hard to do things just by Google things. It has to be a credible sourcing of information, which is unfortunately time consuming, but absolutely necessary in order to get the credibility you need. And of course, start networking and talk to people. And I think the transparency and the credibility and long-term, how do you say, commitment would be key to any of these issues.
Yeah, I will have a follow-up question on that, Tobias, which is, there is a lot of impact investing conferences that are taking place, usually LGBTQ plus is not really part of it. Are you making efforts to try to get on the radar screen of those industry events?
Well, of course we have to, don't we? We just have to elbow our way into them one way or the other. So that's the plan. Yes.
Okay, great. So I have another question. I'm afraid that I might not be smart enough to completely understand what it means, but I'm sure that you will. Do investing professionals utilize anything like an LGBTQ plus tax credit or something like that to make investments more appealing? Oh, that's a great question. So I finally understand it. And I think it would go to Bill Moran with our wealth specialist on this call. If you put your money into a fund that has a social goal or that has an environmental sustainability goal, do you get any form of tax credit, or you're basically getting the same deal than if you were putting your money in armaments and nuclear plants?
So I am not a tax advisor. So let's just reference it from that point. In the United States, no, you're not necessarily going to get any tax credit for it. But hopefully you're going to get a better credit in knowing that you're doing the things that are more important to you and to your family and to your community. And that we can still continue to make change. But I'm not aware of any tax credit that you would be getting by investing in an LGBT fund.
Well, I have a call with Treasury later on for Pride, so maybe I'll drop the suggestion that impact investing be taxed at a lower rate. Sasha, you would know that. Is there any place in the world where your capital gains are less taxed because they are on a fund that has that dimension?
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
No, not that I know of. No.
Great. Well, I'll definitely talk to Joe Biden and the European Union about it next time I have an opportunity.
I think you should, definitely. Yes.
So listen, now we're coming toward the end of our session, and I'm going to be that really annoying moderator that is going to ask you to close the webinar with maybe a call for action. And so I'm going to go one by one. It's going to be very annoying for you. So think about it. I'm going to start with Tobias so that you guys have a chance to think about it. But what would be your call for action to people that might listen to that webinar or might want to have a positive impact on LGBTQ plus impact investing? Tobias.
Yes, so I didn't get the time to think about it. But yes, no, I think about where you put your money. Demand something from anywhere you have your pension or whatever. Actually, even when you buy products and services, make questions and ask them even difficult questions. And that's the only way you can bring about change. And we, of course, want to be part of that chain of bringing change together. And we want to encourage people to talk to us, to give us information, to anything that we can do to promote this further and really push and pull companies across the world into a more inclusive business strategy.
Thank you, Tobias. So, next, of course, I will go to the former global head of knowledge. So, Kelly, what would be your call to action for the people that might listen to that webinar?
It's pretty simple, Fabrice, and it's quoting Francis Bacon, and that is knowledge is power, especially in here. Know where your money's going, get informed, get educated, and that's the way that we can really make a difference. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. Wasn't Francis Bacon a painter? I'm clearly getting misled here.
Some kind of pork product, Fabrice. Yeah.
Good. And then I will go to you, Bill. What do you think? What could be a call for action for people listening to this webinar?
I would just dovetail everything that's already been said. Have those courageous conversations. you know, whether it be with your financial advisor or the institutions that you're doing business with, et cetera, and ask them, what are they doing? And are they doing the things that make a difference? And don't shy away from it, from the things that are important to you.
And finally, Sasha.
Most of the things have been said already. The last thing is money is power. Think about it.
Well, let me take this opportunity to thank all four of you for the generosity with your time, but also for being so thoughtful about the issues. You know, very often people say that bankers are heartless, but yet on this call we have four bankers that seem to care about the future of our society, the future of our planet, and so that's very heartwarming. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm very thankful for your time. And I hope we get to connect on another opportunity on LGBTQ plus impact investing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, and all the best.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.